Students, let's talk about the economy and the macroeconomy as a business cycle. And that is a concern that the government has. They want to see how the economy is doing. Unfortunately, we know that there is such a thing as a business cycle. There is a movement that is cyclical. Sometimes you have a contraction, sometimes you have an expansion. Not much we can do about it. Is any human system has these cycles. Even we as humans have cycles that we feel stronger or better, and then we feel weaker or more tired. Not much you can do about it, but the government is interested in following these trends and seeing if they can try to mitigate them. Now, you do have a phenomenon of recession and even depression if there is a severe crisis, and it may be followed by a boom or a peak in economic activity. They noticed all that years ago, even though the classical economists like Adam Smith and Jean-Baptiste Say, they were very optimistic. They thought Adam Smith thought there was an invisible hand that fixed all the markets. Jean-Baptiste Say, a Frenchman, he thought that supply created its own demand, so there is nothing to worry about. People will produce things, or they will provide services, and people will buy them, and everybody will be gainfully employed. Unfortunately, that became laughable, because as the Industrial Revolution came in and people had to work in large factories with the division and specialization of labor that Adam Smith discussed already and predicted for it to have a good effect on production, it did, but then it created the problem of capital versus labor. It created the power of the market. Some tycoons that had the ability to hire more and more employees with their capital could also fire them. And then you had unemployment, financial crisis, banks. All that is tied together. In the 30s, we had the Great Depression, when large numbers of people were unemployed, and it was a cruel time. The government was helpful at the beginning, helpless to help. But what they tried to do is at least to measure the economy's performance, and they came up with these indicators, the economic or macroeconomic indicators, and they remind me of a car. When you look at the dashboard of a car, you have a speedometer. Well, that's the GDP. How fast are we going? That's the production of services and goods in the country. If we do a lot, we go fast, well, we're going to reach some kind of maybe happiness. Now then another indicator, just like in the car you may have an oil pressure gauge, we have the unemployment rate, UR, and you also have the inflation. The inflation rate is the price inflation or deflation when it's negative. And we are worried about that. If prices go up too fast, well, that's considered a bad thing. If prices go down, that can be a sign that there is a crisis and people are not able to sell anything. They have to sell everything at clearance prices, like it's been happening a little bit with the real estate market in the last few years. That's a sign that something is wrong. Ideally, all these gauges in the car would show the right amount. A small inflation rate or no inflation rate, a small unemployment rate or no unemployment rate to speak of, and a good amount of speed or GDP. Now let's talk about the GDP. What is the GDP? It's all the products and services created domestically, produced domestically in our country. If something is imported, well, that is not part of the GDP. Now, how do we divide the GDP for convenience sake? In C, that's consumer consumption and consumer durables. I, that's investment, products and services. G is government. X is exports, and M is imports. Now, these are all domestic. For example, C would include food, would include cars used by private people, would include clothing, and it would include shoes and all the consumer products that we know very well. And it also would, in the durables, would include appliances, refrigerators, washing machines, cars, trucks, things that last a number of years. Those are called consumer durables. They both go into the C category. I, that is the category that's used by business. Businesses build factories. They buy machines, computers, technological items, even clothing, if it's work clothing, that will go into I. So all that is investment, is what businesses buy. Because don't forget, this is the expenditure approach. So we're looking at all the products and all the services. We're not really looking so much here at the money side, we're looking at products and services. What services? Medical services. If they're used by the consumer, they're going to C. If they're things used by, services used by companies, it might go into I, such as consulting, research and development, work of specialists or scientists. That may all go into I. What about G? G, that's government expenditure. All that the government buys. Now, what government? It could be federal, local, county, or city, depending what kind of analysis we're doing. But the government buys many things. Military spending, tanks, weapons, all that goes into G. Then we have of course, the activity of local government and the activity of city government, police, all that goes into G. Then we have X. X, that is exports. Exports are products or services sent abroad. For example, if we ship cars to China, well, that is definitely an export. If tourists come here and get services such as touring services, or maybe they gamble in Las Vegas, well, that's a form of export as well. It is a service, but it is exported. What's imports? Imports are things we buy from other countries, or services we use in other countries. And that is deducted from export. In fact, we can call X minus M net exports. Now, what happens when we import products? Well, let's say we import cars from Japan, $40 million worth. Well, then they will go into the C category because they will be used, let's say, by private people. And C will go up by 40 million. But then M, imports, will go up by 40 million. So 40 minus 40, that's zero. So that doesn't make any difference for the GDP because that is a product that is imported. Now, what about if there was a profit made on that? Well, that profit, that would count. That would go into the GDP.